Don't try to get rid of the ego. Posted on June 2nd, 2011. There's a big difference between letting go of the ego and getting rid of the ego. When you're letting go of the ego, it's a movement free of struggle and has a sense of compassion or love at the background. But when you try to get rid of the ego, there's an energy of fear and struggle involved in the movement. You automatically start letting go of your ego when you recognize your true nature as pure consciousness, which makes you stop identifying with the ego. Always remember, only an ego will try to get rid of the ego. Anything you fight will become more concrete in you. The paradox of life is that you cannot become free of anything by fighting it. If you have an addiction, the worst way to go about becoming free of it is by resisting or fighting it. When you resist something, you automatically become shackled to it. In the same way, when you try to fight the ego, or try to get rid of it or suppress it, you're unconsciously enhancing it. The ego is not an evil, it's just a movement of energy that got created out of delusion. The delusion itself was innocent to begin with. When you focus on the physical nature of reality, it's natural for the mind to move from the perspective of separation and derive its identity from a self-image. The ego structure, however, starts creating suffering because of its movement of clinging or attaching to forms, because it gets its identity through its attachments or possessions. The ego feels insecure because it constantly needs validation for its survival. Instead of fighting the ego movement or feeling guilty about it, what needs to be done is to see through its falseness. Once you recognize that the ego movement is just a pattern, which is not permanent or real, you automatically free up identification from it. Once you stop being suckered in by the ego movement, you're on your path of being free from it. It takes some time, a few months in some, a few years in some, before you can totally be free of being pulled in by the ego movement. Don't resist any part of the ego movement. Anything you allow completely, you will transcend completely. Anything you resist will persist. These words point to the core of what letting go is all about. You will notice several dark patterns come up while you start seeing through the ego. As your consciousness becomes brighter, it will shine its light on all the hidden areas of your energy field, areas where your ego can seek refuge when it's unnoticed. It's important to not feel guilt or make it personal when certain dark patterns in you start coming to light. You may see yourself acting out an addictive pattern every time the ego feels diminished or inferior. Watch this pattern, don't judge it, and don't become completely taken in by it. Retain some part of your consciousness even when the energy of the ego movement is trying to take over the entire space of your attention. People find it the hardest to become free of certain dark patterns in them because they're not willing to consciously allow it when it tries to take over. When you allow something consciously, you're not taken in by its movement, but you get to see the energy in action. As long as you suppress the energy, it will not be able to leave the space of your energy field. Remember that none of these patterns are personal. They're part of the accumulated energy that stayed back because you suppressed it at some level. It's usually the patterns that you feel guilty about that become the refuge for the ego because it can easily remain rooted there. Let go of the guilt, let go of your judgment, and witness the patterns from a place of compassion. Only then will you become free of its influence. Becoming free of the ego is not a battle, it's a movement of love.